Hello and welcome. My name is David Musgrave from Winthrop Development Consultants in Australia, and you are attending the session on Microsoft Dynamics GP development and choosing the right tool. A little bit of information about me. So I'm Winthrop Managing Director of Winthrop Development Consultants. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I've been in the Dynamics world since 1994. And as I mentioned, I'm based in Perth, Western Australia. So a little bit of a summary of what we're going to cover today. We're going to first look at customization tools, and that includes Modifier with Visual Basic for applications, Visual Studio Tools for Microsoft Dynamics GP, Microsoft Dexterity, a little bit on GP Power Tools, and service-based architecture. We'll also continue with integration tools, including Table Import, Integration Manager, eConnect, and the different type of web services available, and a little bit of time on third-party tools. So we might as well get started. So we'll go straight into customization tools. Now, if you have any questions, please be sure to add them to the chat. I'm going to be available and will respond to the questions at the end of the session. So please write them down while you remember them. So we've got a number of different tools to customize the user interface, and this is one of the great things about Dynamics GP is that it offers you many options, and depending on your level of development skill, you can use different techniques. So the first one being Modifier with Visual Basic for applications, otherwise known as VBA. Then we'll go into Visual Studio Tools, we'll cover Modifier, Microsoft Dexterity, and I just wanted, while we're on this slide, we'll mention there are user interface standards that are designed to make sure that the windows that you create look like Dynamics GP windows and that the user can't actually tell the difference between original code and what has been modified. So one other thing is that there's this concept of hybrid development, and this is where you're using more than one tool to complete a project. If one tool can't do everything you need, please don't feel that you can't use another tool. Mix and match the tools as you need, find the best tool for each job, and your solution might be made up of many. If it works, it's a good solution. So we'll cover first with Visual Basic and Modifier. So it's a tool that can be used by power users, partner consultants. You can use it to automate the GP interface. You can add additional business logic. You can modify any window in the entire GP product and the add-on products as well. You can reference system dialogues. So when a dialogue pops up, do you want to save, discard, cancel? You can work with those. You can use VBA with reports. However, you have no access to the underlying business logic or table structures underneath. The other thing that's very important at this stage is it's not compatible with the web client. VBA code will not run on the web client, and VBA itself has been classified as end of life. And while we're mentioning it here, you really should be looking to move away from VBA. So we'll start with a quick demo and just give you an idea of what you can do. So here I have Microsoft Dynamics GP. And I'm going to open the customer maintenance window. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an additional field to this window down the bottom here. And we are going to make sure that that data is saved along with the customer record. So now to speed things up, I'm going to use the wonders of macros. And I'm going to play a macro. And this will create my modified form. So what this will do is, it's running at the moment, but it will exit, go into the modifier, it will add the field, it will move, expands the window, moves the other fields down, adds the new field, links the prompts, and it will go through and update the tab sequence, and our new field will be all ready to go. It's almost done. There's a tab sequence. And link the prompt, and we're back to GP. So now that was achieved just by recording a macro as we went through the process of making the changes manually. It just meant that I can speed up the process when I'm showing it to you. As much as I love completely live demos, a little bit of cheating's allowed. Okay, and once we're back to GP, and it's finished the login process, here we go, and we're back to customer maintenance. Now, the macro's finished. Okay, so we've added the field, but you'll probably notice it's not there. Now, I can ask for a show of hands of who's worked out what's wrong, but that's not going to work so well with a session that is recorded this way. So what I'm going to show you is what the problem is security. If you hadn't worked it out, you need to tell the Dynamics to open the modified version of this window. So I'm going to use another macro, and that will open up the security settings window and change the access. So you'll see that I can change the access from the original to the modified and reopen the window. And now we can see our reason for change that we added. So here's our new field, we're all ready to go. So the next step then with VBA is we need to add the window to VBA, and we also need to add the fields that we're going to be working with. These are the fields like the customer ID field, the save button, the delete button, the actual field that we've added ourselves. So we need to add those. Now, something to realize is that with the ribbon, these are not actually dexterity buttons, and we can't add these to VBA. So before we can actually use and add the fields, we need to actually run another macro, which is going to open up the user preferences for this user. Let's start it. And it is going to change it to use the original menu mode rather than using the ribbon. So now if I relaunch GP, log in, and you'll see that we've now got the menus once I can get back in. So the window will be looking, but won't be showing the ribbons anymore, but showing the older style menu bar. So now with this, I can now add those to VBA. So I'm going to run another macro, which is going to add the window to VBA. In fact, I'll just show you the choices here. It's going to add the window, add current window to VBA. It's going to then activate add field mode and click on all the fields I need. And then it'll finish and turn off add field mode. So let's do that. Okay, so now that I've added all of these fields to VBA, if I go to Tools and actually open up the VB editor, so Customize and Visual Basic Editor, you'll see that under Dynamics we have the Customer Maintenance window. Right now there's no code, so let's put some code in. So this is fairly standard code. There's lots of examples on the internet. I also will be posting this exact example with all the code for the demos that I'm doing on my blog. The link for my blog will be available at the end of the presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using the DUOS, which is the Dynamic User Object Store. It's actually the SY90000 table stored in the company database, but it is a way that makes it very easy for VBA code to write data to a SQL table. So the code that I've got here is basically designed to handle what we call the CRUD events. That's create, read, update, and delete. So whenever we change our customer ID, we need to pull up the data that we've previously saved. When we run the save, we need to make sure that we can actually run the save event. So where is it? This one here, we can actually make sure that we're running the saved event, and then we can also handle whether modal dialogues, so we can handle whether you've, if you move off to another record, and now this is actually written in such a way, in fact you can see it here, it's written, so it can handle whether the terminology is customer or debtor, for the different types of English, and also handles when I want to delete this record. So if we let this code run, so I'm just going to compile it, and I will do one last, actually I'll do that in a bit, we'll just show that this is working. So you'll see that it enters in a reason for change, and asks, what was the reason for change. If I say this is just a test update and save it, you'll see when I bring it back, it's got test update. If I'm creating a new record, you'll see that it actually starts off with enter a reason for change. So that code is working. You can see I've got a dot, actually if I reopen the window, you'll see I have a dot before and after, which indicates that it's a modified window and that there is VBA code. So the last thing I'm going to do while I'm here is we'll run this last macro, which will reset the ribbons back. And exit GP. So okay, and we come back into GP and you'll see that that is now with the ribbons and everything is working with Modifier and VBA. So we'll move on to the next part of the demo now, or next part of the session, where we look at the next tool. Just once we're in, there we go, customer maintenance. You'll see we've got the ribbon and test update is there. Okay. So the other tool we can use then, or another tool we can use, is Visual Studio Tools for Microsoft Dynamics GP. So this is a suite of code that's been written which allows Visual Studio developers to actually integrate and reference resources in Microsoft Dynamics GP. So you can write your code in C# or VB.NET. You've got access to everything that the .NET frameworks will give you. You can create new forms which look Dexterity-like, but they're not quite Dexterity windows. You can create events on user interface changes. You can also call underlying business logic, which VBA cannot. You can access existing GP tables or third-party tables. So these are Dexterity tables. You can access those using Visual Studio Tools without having to go out to SQL using ADO.NET. However, one limitation is under normal circumstances, it won't work with report writer reports. There is a way of getting report writer functions to work. So now, when it comes to web client compatibility, Visual Studio Tools is web client compatible. However, the forms you create using Visual Studio Tools are not compatible with the web client. They used to work if you used in the old web client for GP 2013 was used Silverlight, but since they moved to the HTML5 based web client, it doesn't support WinForms. Now, if you're installing the templates for Visual Studio Tools, it does come on the installer, but it's only for the older versions of Visual Studio. So if you're working on a later version of Visual Studio, our good colleague Tim Woppert in the UK has actually published a set of the templates which you can actually load from within Visual Studio itself, and if you look at this article, it will explain about it. So that's if you need to get the objects loaded into your Visual Studio. So now, the other thing that we can do here is we can use, with our modified form, we can use Visual Studio to add the code instead of VBA. So we can use this to replace VBA. This is one of our options to get rid of VBA. It is web client compatible as long as we're not creating any additional forms. The forms, you modify them with Modifier, which we already have done for the previous demonstration. We create an assembly using the DAG tool, which is a dictionary assembly generator. And then the Visual Studio project, we can use that, reference the modified forms, write our code, build the project, and deploy it into the add-ins folder, and it will work. So let's have a demo of that. So right now, we've still got the VBA code running. So what I'm going to come and do here is I'm going to open up the Visual Basic Editor, get in here and delete it. So the code is gone. I will save. So the other thing we can actually do is we can go in here and we can say customize and remove the window from Visual Basic. So now if I reopen that window, you'll see we have the field there, but nothing's working. Okay, so the functionality has been removed. So now what we're going to do is we're going to exit GP and we're going to run the DAG tool. So I've got this batch file here, which is going to elevate my permissions and then run the DAG tool. So here's the dictionary assembly generator running, and it creates a DLL and an XML. Okay, and you'll see it's actually updated as to the correct time, and it's made a copy of these, but these are sitting in the Dynamics folder, but I've also got a copy here. So I'm then going to open up my solution. So this is Visual Studio, and there we go, got the code. Okay, so in this code here, I have got the references to the Dynamics application and to the DAG'd Dynamics Modified Form Dictionary, as well as the Dexterity Bridge. So I've got those as my references, and we have the same DAG style code. In fact, what I've got is I've actually written a couple of functions here. So we have a duos read, which allows us to read information from the SQL table, the dynamic user object store. We have the write, which allows us to write the data, and we have the delete. So these functions can then be called by the appropriate code. So if I look at the code, display existing record, so that's actually bringing up a record. I will then have the duos read command. When I save the record, I have the duos write command, and when I delete, I have the duos delete command. I just need to add handlers that pick up the different events. So I've got one on when the window, before the window opens, and then I've got events on display existing records, save record, and before and after the delete button. So if I compile this code, so I've just compiled it and built, it has built my DLL, and I'm going to run copy, which will copy the DLL from the build folder, which is sitting under the binary in my project. If I then, and it will place it in the add-ins folder in GP. So if I go back to here, sorry, this one is my GP, and go to add-ins, you'll see that there's a new DLL sitting there. So let's launch GP. So now, using the same modified window, but now instead of the code being VBA, it's in this case it's VB.NET. So now the way you program in Visual Studio, the events you can actually get better events and be a little bit more dexterity-like with the way you write your code rather than VBA-like. So the way you actually trigger on events, for example, we don't have to work with the modal window. We can actually use save record, which picks up all of the save events. Okay, but you'll see that the reason for change now is showing, and test update is there. So it's using the same data, but it is coded. There's no VBA, the dot is missing, just using the modified window, and everything just works. Okay. So the next option then is Microsoft Dexterity. So Dexterity is the actual language that GP itself was created in, and that is the best environment that you can use. And It allows you to create seamless integrations. Code that's written with Dexterity, a user, if they haven't seen the original, they won't know that it's been changed. You've got full access to the tables, functions, and procedures within the code. However, you can only modify core windows in the Microsoft Dynamics GP product. So this is windows that exist in dynamics.dig, and they've got to be in that core product. You can develop cross-dictionary code, so you can write code to other third-party products. And when we talk third-party here, we mean anything that's not dynamics.dig. It doesn't necessarily mean an ISV product. So project accounting from Microsoft is a third-party product from a development perspective. So you can write cross-dictionary code, but I can't modify their window. What I can do is I can actually have a second window pop up, and that's what we call a parallel window, and you can have that synchronized so that it shows the same data as you move in the original window. But it's not quite as neat as being inside the same window. You have access, since version 14, we have access to .NET resources via the .NET Interop, and we also have the ability to create web service procedures using service-based architecture. So those are extra functionality that allows you, if you need to get into resources outside of GP, or you can have products calling into GP using web services. So let's give you a demo of what Dexterity can do. So I'm going to close GP, and we shall open up Dexterity. So in Dexterity, I've got a work set, which allows me to group together all of the parts of this particular project. I have the form, so this is the customer maintenance window, and you'll see I've already added reason for change to it. That's exactly the same steps that I used in the modifier to add this new field. Okay. I have created functions for duos delete, duos read, and duos write. So that allows me to get to the data in the duos table. I use the startup procedure, and this is used to register the events. So I've got an event when the form opens, and you'll see where that's used in a second. I have an event when the window runs before the window is opened. It also runs automatically when the window is restarted, so when the clear button is pressed or after a save. And then we have the events for display existing record, save a record, and a table trigger that picks up when the table's been deleted. So we're capturing those same CRUD events. We've got the triggers handlers here, each one doing the specific things it needs to do. Now, the extra bit here that's in here is I'm going to be using an alternate window. Once you take your window from Dexterity and you move it into another dictionary and you deploy your chunk, you'll see that it becomes an alternate window. So I've got a check here for security, which is going to make sure that that the security is set correctly, so that the code, my triggers, only run when you've got the alternate window in play. If you don't have the alternate window open, you've got the original window, these triggers don't do anything. That's with the exception of the delete. The idea is that if you do delete the record, we don't want to leave an orphan behind, so that will still run. But display and save, if the alternate window is open, they can't access the extra field because the extra field is not on the original window. So now that we've got all of that there, I'm going to compile it. And I've got my code compiled. I'm going to exit out of this. This will now load Dexterity utilities, and it's done it on the other screen. I might move that across. Okay, I'm going to run that macro a second time just so you can see it running. Okay, so it extracts out all the changes we've made and creates a chunk. And it all happens fairly quickly, but what we have from that now is this .cnk file, which is a chunk file. I'm now going to hit copy, which will copy that file and put it into over here, cust, there it is. Okay, so we've now got this cust file here. Delete the old one there, but okay, so we've got cust file. Now when GP runs, it will ask you whether or not you want to include new code, or I've actually got an option which makes it include new code automatically. So when I launch GP, you might see a flash where it just says including new code. Bang, that was it. And then GP loads. So we now have the Dexterity dictionary loaded. So if we log in, so right now the modified window is still in play, and the VB.NET code with the DLL is still in play against that modified window. If I go to the original window, that code is disabled, but we now, at the moment, you'll see, so if I open this up, okay, so you'll see customer maintenance. This is the modified version of the window, and this is running with the DLL. So I'm going to go back to security, and I'm going to go into user security. It's often this is a good way to do it, is you can go into user security and select who you are logged in as, and that way you can jump straight to the appropriate alternate modified forms and report window. Then it's also a good idea to select the product. If you don't select the product, you'll get a full list. So I can select our product and go to Windows. And actually, you're going to have to go to GP. You need to go to the original product. Windows. And when we open up sales, just give it a second to load, go to sales, customer, and we're going to have to say all products. I was trying to avoid all products because if you say all products, it does take a little while longer to load. So while it's loading, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat session, and we can cover them at the end of the session. All right. Now it shouldn't make a liar of me, and there we go. Okay, so we've got 3 versions of the customer maintenance window. We've got the modified one, we've got the original one, and now we have this new Dexterity-based customer user-defined fields one. So I'm going to select that and save. And this time, when I open my window, you'll see, oops, that's not what I want, this one. When I open the window, you'll see that there are no dots anymore, so it's not the modified version, but we do have this extra field, and the code is working. So you'll see, there we go. Okay, so that is using Dexterity to achieve the same thing. All right, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so we have another option available to us if we want to not have to actually worry about using a Dexterity environment or not using Visual Studio and getting away from VBA. We can use GP Power Tools. It is, again, another replacement technique for VBA. It's web client compatible. You modify the forms with the modifier, as we've done previously. We then can use GP Power Tools triggers and scripts to add our code, and we're able to reuse or use Dexterity, SQL, C#, and VB.NET as our languages. The bulk of what we're going to do is actually in Dexterity, but we have access to the other languages. There's no deployment steps needed, so we don't need to roll out a DLL and roll out the modified forms dictionaries or packages. Once it's installed, it becomes live. There's no external development tools, so you don't need SQL Server, Management Studio, you don't need Visual Studio loaded, and you don't need Dexterity loaded. And we can trigger on modifier added fields, which is something Dexterity can't do, and we can reference modal dialogues, again, something that Dexterity can't do. Okay, so let's show you what we can do. So what I'm going to do is we'll pop back into, actually we'll go into Power Tools, and I'm going to activate an option here called Dynamic Product Selection, which will allow me to actually choose when I open the window which version of the window I want. So I'm going to come in here and say, give me the option of all three of these windows. Okay, so now when I open the window, customer maintenance, I can choose which one, so I'm going to open the modified one. Okay, now right now the code is working because that DLL is there. So let's get rid of that DLL. Okay, and we'll relaunch GP. Okay, so now when we go into that same window, the modified window, the field will be there, but there will be no functionality to actually, or no code to make it work. So I come up here and we open the modified version, and you'll see that the field is here, but there is no code to make it work. So now all we're going to do is we're going to use Power Tools to make that code work. So we've got a project here. And again, this is handling the same event. So it's handling the read event, the delete event, and the write event. If we open up the triggers here, for example, the read, you'll see that we have a trigger on display existing record. We have another trigger on deleting of the RM customer master table. And here we've got one on save record. So it's exactly the same events, and the scripts that we run are almost identical. We're using a helper function that's running duos commands to actually read and write to the duos. So if I activate the triggers, start them running, so I don't have them running automatically, but normally you would. And we can open the window and say open the modified window, and you'll see now that the reason for change is there, and test update is working. So now this is exactly the same functionality, modified window, but GP Power Tools is doing the code for us. Okay. So I'll stop the project. Okay, so what we've done there is we've had 4 different tools that have created the same customization 4 different ways. Gives you a lot of flexibility. It will allow you to get VBA out of your systems, but you've got different choices, and that's what this is all about, is having the different choices for working out which tool that's best for you. So we'll have a quick chat about SBA, which is Service-Based Architecture, which was added in GP 2014. This allows us to create global procedures which we can expose externally as REST-based web services. We can use it to wrap a window, which is basically driving the UI, as though the user's entered things, or we can actually call procedural code, and we can then just write code to do whatever we need. It does consume a user license because it will open up a session, log you in, run the code, and then log out. So it does, while it's running, it will use a license. You can't make a second call. This is actually a performance thing, is that if you need to make a second call, you might need to have another login, because while it's currently logged in the same way that you can't log in twice to GP as the same user, service-based architecture can't log in twice at the same time. So service-based architecture is supported, but it's not being developed further. But it has its place. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the next section, but it has its place. There are times where you might want to call things externally, and it doesn't have to be data in or out. It can be actually run this process with an external web service call. Also, if you want to code this, it does need to be coded in Dexterity, or you can use GP Power Tools, which does have custom service-based architecture scripts that you can call. If you do use Power Tools, you don't need to deploy them, and you won't need to have to restart your services or restart GP every time you deploy. So the next section then is integration tools. So we've been looking at the customization tools, which allow you to customize the user interface. Now we're going to look at how you can actually get data in and out. Usually it's data in, because data out is fairly easy. You can just access the SQL tables. But getting data in, there's a few different ways we can do it. So don't forget, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. All right, so we've got a number of different tools. I'm going to go through those in a second. They've all got pros and cons. But first, you probably need to have a think about what you mean by data integration. Is this an initial setup? Is this a once-off run that you just need to get your data in with a new implementation? Or is this something where you're going to need continual updates? Is this data that's coming in? Is it master data? So is it vendors and customers, or is it transactional data? So sales transactions. What sort of volumes are you talking about? If you've only got a small number of transactions, you might be able to do it using different tools. So if you've got thousands of transactions every day. Is it a manual or automated process? So does a user need to be involved to actually say, okay, let's bring the data in, or is it going to be fully automated? If it's automated, is it going to be something that's polled? So every day, every 10 minutes I go and look, is there more to import? Or is it going to be real time that actually pulls the data in on demand whenever it's actually needed? What level of user do we know who's going to be actually setting it up? Does it need, is it going to be a developer setting it up, or is it a consultant, or is it a power user? What level of user is going to be used to run the integration? And a big one to think about is, what do you do with errors? If something goes wrong and an import fails, do you throw out an entire batch? Do you import everything in the batch except the one transaction that failed? How do you log what went wrong? So these are all things you need to think about with integrations. And the different tools have different ways of handling some of that. Okay, so first one, table import. And table import is actually built into Microsoft Dynamics GP. It's on the menus, in the customization menu or tools menu. You might find it. It's only one step above a direct import into SQL. It has a little bit of controls that the user can use. But it can only add records. It can't update an existing record. It has a very high risk of data corruption because there is no business logic to make sure that what you're importing is correct. As I said, most people don't know about it. It's not recommended. I'm only listing it here to do a job about being complete, giving you all the information. So now that I've mentioned it, forget it. So Integration Manager. Integration Manager is a manual process that gets activated by the user. You can have multiple connectors and many different endpoints. Now, the connectors can be ones that drive the user interface. They can be a lot slower than going in via actually accessing SQL tables direct or even using eConnect. But they do have the option of being compatible with dexterity customizations that are on that window, as long as they're not an alternate or modified version of the window. Okay, so you can go directly to SQL tables with some of the connectors. The most popular ones use eConnect because eConnect has the business logic in there as well. You does have a trial license. When you first get GP, you can use it to get your data in as your new implementation, and it doesn't need much in the way of development skills. There is some programmability to it, but so it can be customized, but it can be done by a power user. eConnect is a suite of stored procedures, basically, which can be called in a number of different ways. We can call them with a COM API, that's Application Programming Interface, a .NET interface. We can call the stored procedures directly. We can also go through things like BizTalk and message queuing. And they are also, we'll talk about a little bit more in the future, but they're wrapped as web services as well. So they include lots of business logic to make sure that the data being imported is correct. They have endpoints for most of the core GP features. However, there are some areas or tables which are not included. And also there is not a 100% match of the functionality. There is some functionality that you might find in the GP application that is not in eConnect. So just be aware, while it's extremely powerful, it is not going to cover everything. You can also customize eConnect. So if there's anything that is not going to be handled by eConnect normally, you can actually add pre and post integration scripts just a quick note is make sure you back up those scripts before you upgrade, because they will get overwritten during an upgrade. So keep a note of them. Documentation is key. Okay, so this is using SOAP-based web services. They're an older style of web service. They're wrappers for eConnect. Not every eConnect endpoint is exposed. The installation and configuration of these, particularly the security side, is really complex and a hassle. We don't recommend you use them because they're really annoying. Steve Endo has a better way of calling eConnect using ASP.NET Core to wrap the eConnect in a REST-based web service, which is a much better way of doing it. So then we've also got the new service-based architecture web services, which I mentioned earlier. They are REST-based, but they do require a bit of setup to get service-based architecture running. They do require a GP license when they run. There are limited endpoints that have been provided, but they can be customized with Dexterity to perform any action that you want. And they will, if you're using window wrap, they will support ISV custom code, including what might be on a more modified or alternate window. But it's not being developed, and it's definitely not useful for and doesn't function well if you're trying to import high loads of data. So it has its place, but it's not a good tool for integrating data. So there are a number of third-party tools, and probably one of the most popular is E1's Smart Connect. But there are some other tools. I'm just listing them here. If you are interested in different tools, you can try any of these guys out. So some final thoughts. Basically, try the different tools. Work out what's going to work for you best. Use the best tool for the individual job. Each tool has got pros and cons, and if you need to use more than one tool, please feel free to use it. Don't feel that you have to be trapped into one language or another tool. I mentioned before, if it works, it's a good solution. So a little bit of, if you want to get in touch with me or check out my blog, I will be posting details of the code from this session on my blog, so make sure you subscribe. If you need to contact me, there's my email address and my Twitter handle. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much for voting for my session. And please make sure that you write any questions you might have in the chat. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching the session. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm wearing my hat because I wanted to just to show Bob McAdam that he should be wearing his. So we got a couple of great questions that got asked by Josh, and I've only got a short amount of time for Q&A. If there are other questions you want to ask me, I'm going to be in the watch party after the session. So Josh was asking about Visual Studio and modifier customizations and how they would work with the import or export of customization packages. Basically, the modified window is part of, or goes through the customization maintenance window and is part of the package. And that would be, if you're using VBA, it would be modified window with VBA. If you're using Visual Studio, it's just the modified window, and all the code is sitting in the add-in DLL, or in the also in the you'll need the modified dictionary assembly. So those two DLLs need to be deployed along with importing the package. If you're using GP Power Tools, the modified window again comes with a package that's automatically exported when you export the project from Power Tools, and all of the triggers and scripts that are part of Power Tools are exported as an XML file. So they can be exported and then imported into your live system if you've been testing in a development system. So basically, they're all fairly easy to work with. Visual Studio, you're still going to have to deploy the DLL everywhere, and VBA, you're going to have to either import the package on each workstation or copy the VBA file everywhere. If you're using GP Power Tools, because all the scripts reside in SQL, and if you're using a shared dictionary, you can just import it on one machine, and that's the deployment done. You don't have to visit every workstation. So Josh also asked about creating fields with Modifier. Does it create a new column? in a table, and if so, where is that column? So the answer is no. I know that if with the AX platform, it actually did modify your table, but the way that GP works, you are not allowed to modify existing tables, because if you modify an existing table, then the upgrade process is not possible to do. So if you do basically your customization, that data has to be stored in another table, which can be an additional table that you create. It could be a table you create at SQL, or if you use the DUOS, which is a table that's there already, so that's the Dynamic User Object Store, the SY90000 table, you can use that, and it will store the data for you. It does store the data with one record per field, so it would require multiple reads to read in a lot of data. If you had added 10 fields, you'd have to do 10 reads, but that still works fairly quickly. The other choice is to store it in a SQL table and use some SQL code to read the one record with the 10 fields all at once, and then pass the 10 fields as in PARSE out of the data and pull them back and display them on the window. So that's Josh's questions. Now Richard's asking some questions as well, so we'll get to those. Do you have any performance metrics of different integration methods? I don't actually have performance metrics, but I can tell you that Dexterity will be the fastest, followed by Visual Studio, and GP Power Tools would probably be next, then Visual Studio, and slowest will be VBA. The reason I say that is that Dexterity is the native language, and all of the other languages eventually come back to Dexterity and are making calls to Dexterity to perform their functions. So if you write in native Dexterity or GP Power Tools, which uses just Dexterity code, it is going to be the faster methods, and they're also most stable. Where should modified dictionaries be copied to? So the modified dictionary, if you've got that, well, there's a couple of different ideas about how modified dictionaries should be done. So you can use a shared dictionary in a shared folder and have everybody's workstations pointing to that one folder. Or you can use a synchronized copy where you actually copy data from from individual workstation, or from an update area to the individual workstation. So that way each workstation has a dictionary local, which gives you best performance, but they're synchronized from a central area. So that's a Musgravian principle that if you look up on my blog, you'll actually find an article that explains how that works. The dictionaries themselves should be in the GP folder. That's or if they're not in the GP folder, then they should be in the shared folder. The add-ins folder is only for the add-in DLLs that you create, and that would be not the modified DAGD dictionary. That will be in the application folder. Just your add-in DLL will be sitting in add-ins. Okay, so then Richard also asks about web service performance. So the SBA web services, they're not as performant as people would hope, and that's basically if you've got service-based architecture running, it will spin up an instance of GP, it will log you in, it'll execute whatever service procedure code you've asked it to do, and that will run at the same speed as if Dynamics was running on your Windows machine. And then when it's finished, it logs out, and that user instant or that user license is then available again. So what we found is if you were calling if you called like too quickly calls to web services. If you were calling those both with the same user and the first instance was still running and hadn't finished whatever it was doing, the second instance would actually fail to log in because that license is in use. So anyhow, my time's up. And I have an article on that SBA performance issue. So I will catch you in the watch party, and you can continue to chat with me there. But thank you very much for your time today. And we'll talk to you in the watch party soon. Thanks a lot.